how many books should be in the Bible? And there's actually a lot of controversy about this subject. You'd think there wouldn't be, but there is. And so it is important to know that we actually have the book, and because if we don't, we're in sore shape, man. So how many books should be in the Bible? Well, what we have here, we have the title page of the Authorized Version. A lot of people don't realize that the Bible that we call the King James Version, its real name is actually the Authorized Version of 1611. And what a lot of people also don't know is that though the orthography, which is the spelling, and the typeface, what we would call font now, those things have been updated, but the text itself has not changed in over 400 years. And the Bible tells us that the entrance of thy word giveth light, it giveth understanding unto the simple. Well, the simple, that'd be somebody like me. Somebody didn't know anything about the Bible at one time, pretty ignorant, but God's given me some understanding over the last 38 years, and I thank Him for it. The Bible says the word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. And I don't think there's any way to adequately say the amount, or to express the amount of illumination that the Bible actually gives a person. And what I've come to find out over the years is if you actually spend a good deal of time in the book, if you get into that book, it'll get into you. And if it gets into you, it'll change the way you think. And next thing you know, people will think you're smart. And it's not really because you're smart, it's because God's smart. And you've learned what He had to say and what He thought about stuff. Makes you look smart, you know. So Bible's a pretty important book. There are what people call the lost books of the Bible, or the lost scriptures, you know, and I've had people ask me about that. I don't even know how many times. In 38 years, I've had people ask me about that. Questions like, you know, what about the books that are banned from the Bible? And why are Catholic Bibles, why are they bigger than Protestant Bibles? And the question is, are there scriptures which are missing? And that's actually a pretty important question. And I think it's one that we need to be able to answer. So some people claim there are many additional books of Scripture that ought to be in the Bible. So the question is, what are they? You know, what are these lost books of the Bible? You know, well, let's take a look at the short list, and let's see what people think about it. So these are the contents of the lost books of the Bible. You know, so I think right here's 24 different books that are mentioned. And then here's the forgotten books of Eden. And I don't know, here's another 6 or 8 books. You know, so that's quite a few books. But you know what? This is the short list right here. So let's take a second here and let's look at what the long list would be. Well, under A, we might as well just go through the alphabet, huh? Under A. Well, here's the books that are missing, or people say is missing, under the letter A. Here's another whole sheet right there, so I think that's like 48 different books right there. Then we get to the letter B, and here's a whole bunch more. Then we go to the letter C, and I think you kind of get the point here. It just goes on and on and on and on and on. And why? Well, because everybody has an opinion, but we don't really care about other people's opinions. I just want to know what God said. Amen. And so I just want to know what He thinks. I don't care, you know, what all these other people think. There's even a question about the Gospel of Judas, the lost version of Christ's betrayal. You know, a lot of people didn't even know there was a Gospel of Judas, but they say there is, you know. And the idea behind the Gospel of Judas is that all the other apostles didn't have any idea what was really going on, and that Judas actually performed a very important function for Christ, and because Jesus was trapped in a human body, and Judas arranged to have him set free. People buy into that stuff, you know what I mean? So the idea of the Gospel of Judas supposedly is that Judas is the only one that really knew the truth. Well, that sure does muck up the water quite a bit. We read the Gospel of John. John said that John chapter 6, verse 66, which if you ever read the Bible, you know there's something about 666, right? So John chapter 6, verse 66 says, from that time, many of his, that's Jesus' disciples, went back and walked no more with him. Then said Jesus unto the 12, will you go away also? Then Simon Peter answered him, Lord, to whom shall we go? Thou hast the words of eternal life, and we believe and are assured that thou art that Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus answered them, have not I chosen you 12? And one of you is a devil. He spake of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, for he it was that should betray him, being one of the 12. Well, if the Gospel of Judas were true, then you could just go ahead and throw away Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, because they all got him pegged as a betrayer. You know, so, and Jesus right here says, I've chosen you 12, one of you is a devil. Now, whether you believe Judas was actually a devil or not, well, that don't matter quite so much as the fact that I don't think if Jesus calls a person a devil, I don't think that makes him a good guy or a helper, you know. So, but I have had people ask me about the Gospel of Judas, and again, if there's any truth to that thing at all, you can just throw away a whole bunch of the Bible because it isn't worth anything. So there's got to be a way to sort this mess out, right? Now, how many books should be in the Bible? Well, and to answer that question, we're going to have to go down the rabbit hole, if you've seen The Matrix, right? So we'll go down the rabbit hole with this old rabbit, and we'll have to figure out a few things real quick first. All right, well, what we got right here is we have a map of the books of the Bible. And what this map shows you is where the different books of the Bible were written from. And as you can see, this is the Euro, Asia, Africa right here. You know, you got Europe, Asia, Africa, and they're written all over the place. And the Bible's got a pretty interesting history. Actually, the Bible was written over a period of nearly 2,000 years. That's a pretty long stretch right there, isn't it? It was written spanning 3 different continents, as we see right here on this map, you know, Europe, Asia, and North Africa. You know, so that's a pretty big patch of land that all that covers. It was penned in at least 3 different languages. So we know that in the Old Testament, there was Hebrew and Aramaic. You know, in the New Testament, they say, is written in Greek. But actually, up until somewhere in the neighborhood of about 150 years ago, it was widely understood in Christianity that the New Testament was not written entirely in Greek. In fact, John Fox, who was a Bible historian from the 1500s, wrote about, I think it was the Gospel of Mark. Let's see, Matthew, he said, was written in Hebrew. The Gospel of Mark was Latin. Luke was in Aramaic, and John was in Syriac. And so the different books of the Bible, and we don't even know about Paul and all his travels, what his stuff was wrote in. But ultimately, this stuff was translated into different languages. So we know it's at least 3 different languages, and quite possibly several more. In fact, I have some of those old books on my shelf that tell about how they were originally written in different languages. One of the introductions on the Bishop's Bible to the book of Matthew tells about it being originally written in Hebrew. Not only that, not only was it written over 2,000 years and spanning 3 continents and at least 3 different languages, but it had more than 40 different authors. You know, 40 different guys wrote portions of the Bible, and most of them didn't even know each other. So that's a pretty wild history for a book to come together in a way like this, you know. And there's no book on the planet that's anything like this book. Totally unique in the world, and yet at the same time, the world's all-time bestseller. All right, so I want to look at the book of the prophet Isaiah. And the book of Isaiah was written about 750 years before the birth of Christ. Now, this is one of the major prophets. It's one of the larger books in the Bible. And again, written about 750 years before Jesus was born. And that means that Isaiah was written about 350 years before the Old Testament was completed. So when the book of Isaiah is written, the Old Testament isn't even finished yet. And nobody knows how many books will be in the Old Testament. And that's still in the process of being written. If you are aware of Bible history some, you know that the last book of the Old Testament, Malachi, was written somewhere around 400 BC. So this is Isaiah is written somewhere around 350 years before the Old Testament was completed, before Malachi, that is. So nobody even knows what's going on yet. The Old Testament books are still being written. All right, and at that time, no one even knew there was going to be a New Testament. You know, all of this stuff that we have in the New Testament, nobody knew there was going to be a whole bunch of books written called the New Testament. You know, that was completely unknown. And yet here it is today, we have it, right? So that's pretty interesting. So let me ask you a question. Have you heard of the Deutero-Isaiah theory? Well, you say, well, what's Deutero-Isaiah? Well, if you look at the word deutero, that means two. That means like a douche, you know, a two in a deck of cards, you know. So it's a theory about two Isaiahs. And have you ever heard of that theory? A lot of people never have. But I want to explain to you this theory. Now, this theory is developed because of the obvious differences between the first 39 chapters and the last 27 chapters of the book of Isaiah. Some men have theorized that Isaiah was authored by two different men, possibly both were named Isaiah. Now, one of the things you have to understand about what people call scholarship is that they're always trying to come up with some new theories, because you can't really be a scholar unless you get published. So they're always looking to try and find some kind of thing that nobody's ever really thought of before. And so, voila, we have here the Deutero-Isaiah theory. They think there's two different Isaiahs wrote it. Now, if you were to read out of the Pew Bible the comments of Thomas Bennett in the back of the Pew Bible, he's got a summary of all the books of the Bible. And under the Old Testament, there's the book of Isaiah. And the summary for the book of Isaiah says, "This book, as is true of all the prophetical books, derives its name from the prophet whose messages it records. The unity of Isaiah, a problem related to authorship and contents, has been the subject of much debate. The message of the book is twofold: judgment upon Judah for her sins, and comfort and hope for an exiled people." Now, what he's saying here is there's a problem with the unity of Isaiah. There's a problem with the unity of the book. It seems to have a different message in the first 39 chapters than it has in the last 27 here. You know, so for scholars, well, they consider that to be a problem. They're always looking for problems, you know. But were there really two different Isaiahs, or is there a greater truth to be learned here? Maybe there wasn't two Isaiahs. Maybe there was something greater going on in this passage, and we could look a little deeper and find it. Okay, so let me ask you a question. What is a similitude? Well, Hosea chapter 12, verse 10, God says, "I have spoken by the prophets, and I have multiplied visions and used similitudes by the ministry of the prophets." So God says that he uses similitudes. But what is a similitude? Well, according to the 1828 Webster's Dictionary, a similitude is a likeness. It is a resemblance, corresponding in kind or quality, an imaginative comparison, something similar. Okay, so to break it down, in the Bible, God's method of teaching is by similitudes. He said, "I use similitudes." Okay, so, well, what's a similitude? In plain language, a similitude is something like something else. So take, for instance, let's say I wanted you to understand what a lazy boy recliner was. I would show you a chair, and I'd say, well, see, it's kind of like this. You sit in it. And then I might take you over and show you a big fluffy overstuffed couch and say, but it's all fluffy and overstuffed like this couch here. And then I might take you out and show you a lawn chair, the one of them reclining lawn chairs, and say, but you know what? You sit in it and it's overstuffed, but it'll lean back and recline like this too. And after I show you 3 or 4 similitudes, you would have in your mind what a lazy boy recliner's like. That's how God teaches. And when you see the word like or as in the Bible, God is using a similitude. For instance, he says, I'll tell you what he's like, the man that builds his house upon a rock. The man that hears my word and does it is what Jesus said. He said he is like a man that built his house upon a rock. See, it's a similitude. This is like that. And Peter says that you should desire the sincere milk of the word as newborn babes. Okay, so a person who desires the sincere milk of the word is as a newborn babe. It's a similitude. That's God's method of teaching. And so when you see the words like or as in the Bible, then God's using a similitude to teach you something. All right? Well, what I want to show you is what's called the Isaiah similitude. And it has to do with the Deutero-Isaiah theory. All right, so first thing I want you to understand is that how many books are in the Bible? Well, we know that there are 66 books in the Bible. We got them right here on the board that the little man's pointing to. It goes all the way from Genesis to Revelation. The Bible contains 66 books. Okay? Interesting enough, the book of Isaiah contains 66 chapters. Well, that's pretty interesting. If you were to pick up the Bible and open up to the beginning of the book of Isaiah and then open up another spot to the end of Isaiah, what you would find out is that Isaiah has 66 chapters, just like the Bible contains 66 books. So 66 books, and Bible ending with Revelation. Bible contains 66 books. Isaiah contains 66 chapters. That's interesting, right? That's our first similarity. Now, you say, well, that really doesn't mean too much. Well, you're right. On its own, that really wouldn't mean much of anything at all, but it doesn't actually stop there. It goes on. This is just our first similarity. What if I were to say, how would you describe the beginning of the Bible in a nutshell, the book of Genesis, the beginning of the book of Genesis? Well, if I were to describe the first 3 chapters of Genesis in just a nutshell, what I would tell you is that God created the heavens and the earth, and God made man, and the man and the woman sinned. Right? God created the universe, God made man and woman, and the man and the woman sinned. That is the book of Genesis, first 3 chapters in a nutshell. Now let's go to chapter 1 of the book of Isaiah. And let's see what we can find here. Now the first verse, chapter 1, first verse, says the vision of Isaiah, the son of Amoz, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. This first verse is just introductory. It's telling, that this is Isaiah's vision, and here's the time when he had all this vision. So let's get into the first verse where he actually starts to tell us something. Okay? What's he say? He says, "Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord hath spoken." Well, let me ask you a question. How did God make the heavens and the earth? Well, we know in Genesis, he spoke them into existence. He said, "Let there be," and there was. So Isaiah says, "Hear, O heaven, give ear, O earth, for the Lord hath spoken." What's he say next? "I have nourished and brought up children, and they have rebelled against me." Well, what do we see in this passage here, right? Well, just like in Genesis, God created the universe, God made man and woman, and the man and the woman sinned. So what we notice is that the first chapter, Isaiah, begins like the first book of the Bible, Genesis. That's interesting. And that's our second similarity. And a person might say, well, that's still, not a whole lot. Well, you're right. But now we don't have one piece, we have 2. And let's continue on. What if I were to say, well, what if you were to describe in a nutshell the last 3 chapters of the book of Revelation? That would be the 66th book of the Bible. If you were to describe in a nutshell the last 3 chapters of the book of Revelation, how would you describe them? Well, in a nutshell, I would describe them as new heaven, new earth, and lake of fire. That is the very end of the Bible, right? Well, if we turn to Isaiah chapter 66, that would be the equivalent of the book of Revelation. The 66th chapter of Isaiah, equivalent to the 66th book of the Bible. If we turn to that and we looked at the last 3 verses in the 66th chapter, the very end of Isaiah, here's what we find. For as the new heavens and the new earth, which I will make, shall remain before me, saith the Lord, so shall your seed and your name remain. And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith the Lord. And they shall go forth and look upon the carcasses of the men that have transgressed against me, for their worm shall not die, neither shall their fire be quenched, and they shall be an abhorring unto all flesh. So we have here a new heavens, new earth, lake of fire. If you remember from Mark chapter 9, Jesus used this expression right here about a guy being cast into hell. He says, where their worm dieth not and the fire is not quenched. He says it 3 times in Mark chapter 9. Picture of a guy in hell. So we have a new heaven, new earth, and lake of fire, right? Well, what do we find then? Well, we notice that the 66th chapter of Isaiah ends like the 66th book of the Bible, Revelation. Well, now we got something developing here this is now getting outside of the realm of coincidence, right? So it begins, it's got the same number of books, begins like Genesis and ends like Revelation. But that's not all. That's our third similarity. Well, okay, so where is the Bible divided? Our Bible has a natural division in it, right? And it's divided between the 39th and 40th books. In fact, Genesis to Malachi is 39 books, and the New Testament, Matthew to Revelation, is 27 books. Now, that's pretty interesting, and we need to pay attention to that. Because do you remember the comments of Thomas M. Bennett regarding the book of Isaiah? He said under the summary of the books of the Bible, the Old Testament, he says, Isaiah, this book, as is true of all the prophetical books, derives its name from the prophet whose messages it records. The unity of Isaiah, a problem related to authorship and contents, has been the subject of much debate. The message of the book is twofold. Judgment upon Judah for her sins. Yeah, we call that the law. That's the short word for the Old Testament, right? Comfort and hope for an exiled people. Yeah, we call that grace. So what's interesting to notice about this Deutero-Isaiah theory is that the Bible is divided between the 39th and 40th book, and Isaiah is divided between the 39th and 40th chapter. That's our fourth similarity. Now, it's not really that there are 2 different Isaiahs that wrote the book of Isaiah. It's that God is using this as a similitude to teach us something about the Bible if we'll pay attention. And now we have 4 pieces. We know at this point that just like the Bible has 66 books, Isaiah has 66 chapters, so the total number of each is 66. We know that Isaiah begins like Genesis, that God created the heavens and the earth, that God made the man and the woman, and the man and the woman sinned. So it begins like Genesis. We know that it ends like Revelation. We know that the end of the Bible, the 66th book of the Bible, ends with a new heaven, new earth, and lake of fire. And we know that the 66th chapter of Isaiah ends with a new heaven, new earth, and lake of fire. And not only that, but now we know that Isaiah is split in the same place that the Bible split in. There's 39 books in the Old Testament and 27 in the New. Could this be a coincidence? Now, see, we're outside the realm of coincidence here. It's not possible that this could be a coincidence. Why not? Well, because if you recall, Isaiah is written 750 years before Christ is born. The New Testament nobody's even considered it yet. And it's 350 years before the Old Testament is finished. Nobody even knows how many books are going to be in the Old Testament when Isaiah is written, much less that there will be a New Testament. The only person who knows that is God. But what if that's not all there is? What if there's more than what we've already found? Well, let's look at Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3. Book of Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3 says, "The voice of him that crieth in the wilderness, prepare ye the way of the Lord." All right, so let's go to the equivalent in our similitude. That would be Matthew, the 40th book of the Bible, right? Let's go to chapter 3, verse 3. And what do we find? In the 40th book of the Bible, chapter 3, verse 3, it says, "For this is he that was spoken of by the prophet Isaiah, saying, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare ye the way of the Lord." Well, Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3 has the same verse in it as the 40th book of the Bible, chapter 3, verse 3. So we end up with the same verse is even in the same place. This is our fifth similarity. Can this be a coincidence? See, this is way outside the realm of coincidence. We know that the Bible has 66 books and Isaiah has 66 chapters. In total, they are the same. We know that the Bible begins with Genesis, and Isaiah begins the same way. God created the heaven and the earth. God made the man, the woman, and they sinned. Begins the same. We know that Isaiah ends the same way as the Bible, that there's a new heaven, new earth, and lake of fire in the 66th chapter and in the 66th book of the Bible. We know that the book of Isaiah is split in the same place as the Bible. There's 39 chapters that talk about judgment on Israel for her sin, like the Old Testament, and there's 27 new that are grace and mercy for a people in exile, like the New Testament. So it's split in the same spot. And not only that, but then we find out that it's got the same verse in the same spot. That's quite a similitude. I wonder what is the simple mathematical probability of this phenomenon taking place. Well, let's work it out. We know that the total books in the Bible, that there are 66 books in the Bible, just like there are 66 chapters in the book of Isaiah. All right, so there's 66. Now, I'm calling that 66 because this is a simple probability. The truth of the matter is there could be 90 chapters in the book of Isaiah, but there isn't. There could be 100 books in the Bible, but there isn't. So we'll just call it 66. We'll keep it simple. Could be any number, but we'll just say, okay, one has 66, the other has 66, right? So they're the same on that. All right, so we know that each begins like the other, right? They both begin like Genesis. Well, what's the chance in Isaiah beginning like Genesis? Well, we'll call it out of the books. There's 66 books in the Bible. It could begin like any of the other books. Instead, it begins like Genesis. We'll call it 1 in 66. Actually, it could begin like anything. It could begin like War and Peace, but it doesn't. It begins like Genesis. So to keep it simple, we'll just call it a 1 in 66 chance that it would begin like Genesis. All right, so now we also know that Isaiah ends, the 66th chapter of Isaiah ends like the 66th book of the Bible, Revelation, new heaven, new earth, lake of fire. So there's 66 books in the Bible. The odds are 1 in 66. It would end just like one of those books, we'll say. Again, you could ascribe any number to it because we're just confining it to the Bible. So 1 in 66 chance that it would end like the Bible instead of one of the other books of the Bible. We know that the book of Isaiah, because of the Deutero-Isaiah theory, that it's split in the same place as the Bible. We know that just like there's 39 books in the Old Testament, there's 39 in Isaiah talking about judgment on Israel. Just like there's 27 books in the New Testament, there's 27 chapters in Isaiah talking about mercy and hope for a people in exile. It's split in the same spot. And there's a 1 in 66 chance that it would be split in between those two places, just like it is in the Bible, in between those two chapters. 1 in 66 chance it would be split between the 39th and 40th chapter, just like the Bible is between the 39th and 40th book. And last of all, we found that it even has the same verse in the same place, right? So there's 31 verses in Isaiah chapter 40. Actually could have any one of those verses, could have been in the third place, or could have been the third verse, and they weren't. This is the one that matches Matthew chapter 3, verse 3, right? So 1 in 31 chance, because there's 31 verses, could have been any one of them. 1 in 31 chance that it would have the same verse in the same spot. This is the simple probability. In reality, the probabilities are far greater, but just to be able to compute it, we'll keep it down to the simple probability. Well, what does this work out to be? I mean, can this be a coincidence? Well, if it is, it's a pretty big one. Okay, so what is the simple mathematical probability of this phenomenon taking place? What is it? Well, it's 66 times 66 times 66 times 66 times 31 equals only one chance in 588,216,816 that this would work out this way. And that's the simple probability. You know what? Well, Einstein here says it's more likely that you'll win the lottery. You got a 1 out of 302 million chance of winning the lottery instead of 1 out of 588 million that this similitude is going to work out the way that it does. Much more likely you'll win the Mega Millions than the book of Isaiah is going to work out the way that it does. And you know what? You're not going to win the Mega Millions. So that's just the way the odds fall, right? So this is only the simple probability of just one biblical similitude. And you know what? There are literally hundreds more similitudes in the Bible. And for all of them to work out, you just keep multiplying and multiplying and multiplying. And the number is, already we have an outrageous number, and we have just barely even gotten started. So, do you believe the Bible is just another book written by men? See, a lot of people do. But you know what? Las Vegas wouldn't take a chance on those odds. So why would you, right? This is what I wanted to show you about the Bible. Well, what does this tell us about the Bible? Well, here's what it tells us about the Bible. It tells us that we're looking for a book that has 66 books in it. That's what this similitude tells us. It has 66 books in it. It's got 39 in the Old Testament and 27 in the New. Anything that doesn't meet that similitude is not the Bible. Now, there are Bibles out there that have 67 books in it, not 66. I think the New Jerusalem Bible does that. There's also the Roman Catholic Bible, which has, I think it's 73, 74 books in it? I don't remember exactly. I think it might be 73. It's got 7 extra books in it, but it doesn't fit the similitude, so it can't be right. What God has done is he has given just the common person a way of looking at this thing so that they can understand something about the Bible. And he's done it by way of similitude because that's the way God teaches. So again, the question is, do you really believe the Bible is just another book written by men? It can't be. Amen? It can't be. And I thought I'd share that with you today so that you would understand that this book we got in our hands, it is the Word of God. And you can have confidence in it. Amen.